Do you love wasting time, energy, and money on your garden? Me neither. And that's why today I'm going to take you on a tour of my favorite local family-owned nursery/deer processing facility to talk about rookie mistakes to avoid when picking and planting our plants. We're going to get a little nerdy about my favorite plants and talk about what I would actually buy or avoid for my own garden. And then we're going to take our plant haul back to the farm and talk about how to get the absolute best start possible so we don't waste a single cent. Let's do this. First tip, always inspect before you invest. When looking at plants to buy, we want to make sure that we are picking the healthiest looking, most likely to thrive plants. We want to make sure that they're not root bound, like there's too many roots down in the bottom and it's stunting the plant's growth. We want to check for healthy leaves up top. We want to make sure there is no evidence of pests or fungal disease like this here. This is evidence of some brown rot, which is treatable, but why would we want to potentially bring that home with us? If you're better at making phone calls and planning ahead than I am, a great tip right off the bat is to call your local nursery and see when restock day is so that you can make sure you get the widest selection of the freshest, bestest plants available. Bigger does not necessarily mean better. The things that look the best in the greenhouse that might tempt us the most are sometimes the worst possible choices for us to actually buy. Not only are bigger plants going to cost more, you might not actually be getting the head start you think by buying a bigger plant. For example, in a plant that we're going to transplant, which causes a lot of shock to the plant itself, we don't want to have fruit already growing on it because chances are when we do actually transplant it, that fruit's going to die off anyway. By the way, here's a little pro tip for those of us who need any extra space in our overalls for whatever reason. We're 8 months pregnant, but you can use hair ties to turn any clothes into maternity clothes because they stretch and it's real comfy and great. Have patience and show a little bit of restraint. It goes against everything in my adventurous spirit to tell you to make a list of what you actually need before going and looking at the veritable Willy Wonka's candy factory of things available, but these little carts are pretty deceptive. When plants are little like this, you can fit a whole lot more on these flat beds than you probably have space, time, or energy in your garden to actually plant. These tomatoes are cute and little right now, but each one of these is going to get to be about this big per plant. And not everyone actually needs 4 of this same variety of one tomato that's going to put on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of little chocolate cherries. What we really need to save space for are the important things, like our Carolina Reapers, which brings me to our next point. Plant and grow what you're actually going to eat. Yes, I love making hot sauce and entering competitions every year with that hot sauce. Not everyone likes that. Some people even like chard. I don't get it, but that's okay. Grow what you eat. Don't get excited just because it's here. Doesn't mean you've got to buy it. Farmer Adam keeps insisting we walk over to this side of the greenhouse, which would provide excellent fodder for his tiki hut, but a gentle reminder to plant what will actually grow in the area that you are growing. Tropicals probably won't thrive outside the greenhouse unless you live in southern Georgia or Florida or some places of Alabama and other states that I forget about because I've never been to. Full disclosure though, I did buy Adam a banana tree, knowing full well that bananas don't grow here, but I'm gonna try because why not? Pay attention to the signs in the greenhouse. Things that are shade-loving are great to plant in the shade. Things that are sun-loving are great to plant in the sun. I feel like that's pretty ridiculous to have to say out loud, but it's actually really, really helpful to think about, especially if we're planting things that are going to grow on arbors and things. Actually, that's exactly how I get away with planting lettuce, a cool, loving, more shade-tolerant plant that really does well in the early spring and late fall here. But because I plant it under the shade of my hops and grapes that grow in the arbor above it, I'm able to get lettuce year-round, which is delightful. These are also signs that are worth paying attention to. Perennials are plants that are going to grow back year after year. Annuals are plants that are only going to last for one season. Yes, there are ways we can cheat that code, but we'll talk about that later. just because it's sunny and warm outside does not mean it's time to start planting your tomatoes and peppers in the garden. One of my favorite, God, I'm not as good at that as normal. When I still lived in the city and had a lot more spare time, one of my favorite things to do on the first sunny day of the season was go to the local nursery, sit in the parking lot, and watch total noobs come out super proudly with their tomato starts. They were so excited to plant way too early in the season, knowing in my heart that they'd have to come back and buy more when it was actually time to plant them. When it comes to planting successfully, which is what we as lazy gardeners want to do, timing is everything. And that both has to do with our growing zone. We are here in Tennessee, which is growing zone 7B, but growing zone is not the only consideration to think about. If we plant our eggplants too early in the season, they're going to be stunted for lack of sunlight and also be really susceptible to pest and disease like flea beetles. Even though it's still way too early to plant these, it's actually already too late to plant cabbages and other brassicas because it's gonna be too hot soon and they will quickly bolt or go to seed because, again, too late. Timing considerations also really help us to protect our budget because while it would be really tempting to plant things like lettuce right now, it's the right season, right time, all of that, but lettuce is one of those things that can actually grow really quickly from seed, will very likely struggle from transplant shock and be delayed anyway, so why would we spend $3 on a seed start when we could spend $3 on a seed packet instead? Another timing consideration to think about is when your pest pressure is going to be the pestiest. We actually have a whole video on garden pests, you can check that out. But these things, if we plant them right now, are going to really struggle with cabbage worms, and we don't want to let that happen. So we're gonna actually wait on these until fall. But because they are actually really slow, long-growing plants, Brassicas are actually a great variety to start from starts as opposed to starting from seeds. One really important thing to consider when it comes to timing and proper planting, checking the ideal soil temperature to put your plants into. So tomatoes, for example, don't like to ever be in soil that ever gets less than 60 degrees. So if you put it in soil that's still getting down to 40 degrees at night, yes, it's not freezing. Yes, it maybe will be okay, but it's not going to truly thrive until soil temperatures are consistently at 60 degrees. Similarly, nasturtiums, a really great edible flower that adds color and spice to salads and also is a great pest repellent for a lot of plants, doesn't like soil once it gets above 60 degrees. So it's a great early season or shade-loving plant to plant later. Under the shade. As my son is heating me up from the inside out and I'm standing in the shade, let's talk about knowing which plants are actually far better to grow from seeds than from starts. Regardless of your growing zone or your season length, there are actually certain plants that are just going to do better from seeds rather than being transplanted, and here they are. Beans and peas, anything in the cucurbit or cucumber family, like cucumbers, watermelons, squashes, pumpkins, corn, radishes, lettuces, things that have a really short growing window, carrots and other root vegetables, all of those are going to do better just planting from seeds. And honestly, a lot of those, especially the ones that have a really short growing window, are also going to be things that you want to plant successionally or through the season. So having seeds on hand is also going to be really handy. Now that we've covered the basics, let's take a walk through the greenhouse in its entirety, tour style, and talk about what I would actually buy or avoid for my own garden. Let's go. Let's start right here at the very beginning with my very favorite food, watermelon. When picking any starts or planning our garden space, we want to think about something very important, the days to maturity. Watermelon takes a little while to grow, and it also takes up a whole bunch of space. So this is a great thing to plant at the edges of our garden or around our garden, but because it's in the cucurbit, this plant, like cucumbers and squashes and pumpkins, does a lot better just planting from seed. So we're not actually going to get a very big head start by buying this as a start. So let's move right along. Here are a whole bunch of cucumbers, and pickles being my third favorite food in the world, I love growing cucumbers. However, cucumbers are in the cucurbit family. They do actually a lot better growing from seeds instead of from starts. They tend to suffer a lot more from transplant shock. But if you have a really short growing season, starting from starts might be your only option, and that's okay. We just want to make sure we pick the healthiest possible plants. So perhaps these ones as opposed to these ones. Here in Tennessee, we have a bunch of pests that really like to munch on our cucumbers and pumpkins and other things in the cucurbit family. And so one really good tip right off the bat is to start with starts earlier in the season before the bugs really go wild, sure. But successionally plant them throughout the season so that when you start to notice a lot of pest pressure on one particular plant, you can just pull the whole plant, get rid of it, and have a nice fresh start later in the season. If you, like us, have a lot of pest pressure like vine borers, squash bugs, those kinds of things, try to pick more pest-resistant varieties and pay really close attention to the soil temperature. It's really tempting to plant these too early when they're going to suffer from transplant shock and also be more susceptible to pests and diseases. Cucumbers specifically love 70-degree soil temperatures and direct sowing, so we can probably just move right along. One tip though, if you are planting cucumbers and other things in the cucurbit family, is to plant trap plants. So a less desirable variety like Hubbard squash, for example, is a great thing to plant on the other side of your garden in hopes that it will attract the pests over there and leave your precious cucumbers, watermelons, etc. alone. Planting nasturtiums near our cucumbers is actually a great tip because this will help to repel cucumber beetles, one of the cucumber's favorite pests. Also, don't ever plant your cucumbers near potatoes because they share some similar pests and might actually cause a thrive-ins of those pests in that area. Here we have okra, the Lord's favorite vegetable, also mine. These, though, to be totally honest, would not be ones that I would buy as starts. I would rather buy them as seeds. And I actually, because we have such a long growing season, can pay attention to that 56-day maturity and plant 2 installations of okra so that I, halfway through the season, am not picking on a ladder like I normally am. Adam got me a cake for my very first Mother's Day. If you've been around here for a while, you know what a big deal our first Mother's Day actually is to us. And he said this is not just a cake, it's an experience. We're not gonna cry. Oh, it's a farm animals thing. Oh, buddy, he's gonna love it. He's just as excited as I am to pull both sides open at the same time. Ah! Oh my gosh.
That's insane.
This is hilarious. Oh, it's all little individual servings. Oh my goodness, it's like a tiny little donut. Ah, I love donuts. Send a Cake is focused on taking ordinary gifting experiences and making them extraordinary, from boxes that burst with butterflies when opened to floating bubble surprises and more. Click the link in the description to check out more unique gifting experiences for this Mother's Day or any occasion. Moving right along, here we've got some carrot starts. Carrots and other rooting vegetables are another one that you really are going to be better off planting from seeds rather from starts, because these carrots transplanted are very likely to turn into some really weird shapes and sizes. So go ahead and stick to the seeds there. Onions and garlic take a really long time to grow. It is a good idea to get started with sets or starts. However, this isn't quite the right season or the right iteration to plant those. Moving along to the sweet potatoes here. Sweet potatoes are fantastic. This is actually a decent amount of slips for your money here, because each one of these things can become its own spreading separate plant. And if you want a bunch of different varieties, this is a great way to go about getting them. However, my favorite way to get sweet potatoes is to stick a sweet potato from my pantry in a glass of water, get its feet wet per se, and let it start some slips for me for free, because not only will I know that's one that I like, because I've been eating it, it's also one that stored well enough in the climate, aka my hot, humid house that I actually live in. So yeah, you know, grow what you eat. Here we've got some lettuce starts. Lettuce is a really fast growing plant that doesn't actually transplant super well. And if we think about the cost of the plant itself, plus the cost of a pack of seeds, if we're being budget conscious, lettuce is yet another one that would be way better just to go from seeds. Here are some of my favorite things to say, brassicas. Brassicas are really slow growing, so they are actually a really good candidate to start from starts like these, because you can get a head start. However, these really need to be planted in the right season at the right time. At least where we're at, it's way too early to plant sweet potatoes and other things that like to have warm feet. It's already too late to plant things like cauliflower, cabbages, and other things, because not only are the cabbage worms about to start coming out in droves, it's also about to start getting really, really hot really, really quickly, which is going to cause a lot of the things like our cauliflowers and our broccolis and our Brussels sprouts are actually going to be in really high danger of bolting or going to seed because the temperatures have gotten too hot. One way around that, of course, is to plant them in the shade, but you know, I like to, as a lazy gardener, plant what's actually going to work. We're gonna just breeze right by those strawberries, because if I buy another strawberry, Adam might actually murder me. Here is tomato heaven, and this is where 99% of gardeners really get themselves into a whole lot of trouble. Because look at how little and cute, and they come in packs of 4, huzzah! Each one of these tomatoes is going to get enormous, but we already talked about that. So let's actually talk about something else to look at on the label here. This right here is what's most important. Determinate as opposed to indeterminate. Indeterminate means that it's gonna keep growing all season long, which means you're gonna have to keep pruning it and keep, you know, tending and trellising it all season. Determinate means that it's going to set fruit one time, and so you don't want to be clipping off all the buds when it's budding, because otherwise they're not going to come back. The other thing to think about when it comes to tomatoes that is a little different than a lot of other plants is that we actually want really tall, leggy versions of this plant, because we're actually going to nip off all of this extra plant growth and plant it super, super deep. If we think about how big this one little plant is actually going to get throughout the growing season, we want to provide it as much opportunity to source its own water and extra nutrients itself as possible, so that we as lazy gardeners don't have to do any of that. And in that, we're gonna take all of this, and basically only the very top little bit is gonna stick out of the soil, and the rest of it is gonna go deep down to start the plant off right, to reduce transplant shock and give it a better head start. And one last consideration, especially when it comes to fruiting plants like tomatoes, is to think about what the purpose of the fruit is. A tomato puts on fruit because it wants to proliferate its life cycle. The fruit contains the seeds for the plant so that it can continue to survive season after season. And in that, if we want the plant to put on more fruit, we need to think about simulating the natural situation that happens at the end of the season, which means we want to water the plant less as the gardening season continues so that it will put on more fruit. Basically, we make it thirsty, so it thinks that fall is coming, and it better hurry up and give us some fruit. My personal favorite tomato growing hack is to find a bunch of friends who want to share the starts with me, because I don't need 4 of any variety of tomato. But furthermore, I basically only plant in my garden what I'm going to eat throughout the season, which are my very favorite Super Sweet 100s. These grow prolifically throughout the season, create lots of snacks for me to snack on when I'm going through the garden. But then when I'm actually ready to can at the end of the season, I trade a whole bunch of milk to my neighbor who commercially grows tomatoes organically the way that I do. And then I just get a few flats of tomatoes from him for milk, and I don't have to actually take care of a whole greenhouse worth of tomatoes all season long. Lazy gardening at its finest. Tomatoes are one plant that it is very important not to get fooled by our false spring and plant them too early. We want to wait till the soil temperature is 60 degrees, which incidentally helps with a lot of the companion plants that can help our tomatoes thrive, like basil. Basil and onions planted near tomatoes can help avoid things like aphids and whiteflies and other tomato pests. But also, speaking of pests, pesto and tomatoes, great combination. Don't plant your tomatoes near fennel because fennel will inhibit the growth of your tomatoes. It will also inhibit the good taste of your tomatoes because fennel is disgusting. Marigolds are also great companion plants for your tomatoes because they smell bad and so they deter a lot of things like deer, but also nematodes and other things that will actually really negatively affect your tomatoes. Plus, they look pretty, and every time we can find an actual useful flower for our garden, why not? Also, pro tip, it's really easy to collect seeds from our marigolds for next year so that we don't have to buy starts. Another benefit of planting marigolds and other flowering plants near your peppers and tomatoes is that they will attract beneficial pollinators, which will help your plants to put on more fruit. Herbs are great, and a lot of herbs in a lot of climates are actually perennials, but one really important consideration, especially for perennials and herbs, is to watch out for the spreaders. Things like oregano and mint are both great to spice up your mojitos and your sauces. They're also great ant repellents, but they also really like to take over your house, home, and garden if you don't put them in a pot. So be sure to think about those things before you put them in the ground. Or you could be like me and have an oregano garden instead of a strawberry patch, like I did in one corner of my garden. When shopping in the herb section, a little instant gratification goes a long way. But if we're trying to be budget conscious, here's a few things to think about. Basil grows really well from seed. However, it's nice to have some instant basil in your garden so you can get to cooking right away. So what I will often do is plant a basil plant and then plant some basil seeds at the same time I'm planting my basil so that I have some plants coming behind this because we have a really long growing season and sometimes it's hard to eke these throughout the whole season. Also, basil is one of many plants that if you keep cutting it, it will keep growing bushier and bushier and bushier, which is a huge plus. Because again, a little will go kind of a long ways. Things like cilantro are not starts you need to buy as starts. The seeds of cilantro grow so fast, and this plant tends to bolt or go to seed so quickly in the season that this is basically buying a ticket to sadness next week. We'll just put it right back where we found it. Arugula is very similar to cilantro in that regard. It grows really quickly and it bolts really fast, especially as the weather starts getting hot. So this is a better one to plant as seeds. But sometimes the Willy Wonka chocolate factory gets me, and there's varieties of basil and other things available that I don't have the seeds for at home, so it's okay to get those as starts. Plus, instant garden. There are, however, a few herbs that are absolutely worth it to buy from starts. A key example being celery. Celery is actually really hard to grow from seeds, and it takes forever to germinate and actually turn into a plant. So this is one that, even though I'm pretty good at starting seeds myself, I really just prefer to buy because babying seedlings is not one of my favorite things to do with my lazy gardening tendencies. Thyme is another one that I've always just had a really hard time getting to take off and grow to fruition the way that I want it to from seeds. And so because I eat an ungodly amount of thyme, along with my ungodly amounts of steaks with butter and thyme on them, we need thyme. It also takes time to grow. And also we need thyme of a few varieties, like these. Having spent so much of my young life living in Asia, lemongrass is an absolute must, and it's supposed to be a perennial here in Tennessee, but mine has died every year despite repeated attempts. I don't actually like rosemary, but some people do, so this is another one that's kind of hard to grow from seeds. Sometimes is a perennial, but is something people eat. I'm not sure why. And along those same lines, last but certainly not least, is fennel, which is absolutely disgusting. And the reason that I have it here is actually as a warning. Planting fennel around some of your other plants will actually inhibit their growth. So be cautious, or just get better taste buds. What you want to do is actually, when you go to plant this, pick off all of this lower stuff and plant it as...
Is that right?
So,
really?
There it is, my unsolicited advice for the day.
We hear people talk about like this right here.
Yeah, the sucker.
The sucker.
Yeah.
Do you break yours off or leave them?
It depends on whether this is is it a determinant as anyway. So there you go, I'll leave you to it. Awesome. So now we're going to take all of our precious new plants back to the farm and make sure we didn't waste a single penny of our hard-earned money by doing everything we possibly can to get these plants off to a head start. Come on with me back to the farm. Okay, so hopefully we've made it home from the nursery with our budget, our dignity, and our hopes still intact. Now let's give these plants the best head start in our garden we possibly can. The best thing you can do for your plants is to top off all your garden beds with some nice, well-composted compost. If you don't have your composting game down yet, you can totally use bag compost. If this is multiple years into your garden journey, I would highly recommend doing a soil test just to get some data to go off of. I absolutely love Redmond's everything for animals and everything, but there's a link for these. And one of my other soil amendments. Neither one of these things are absolutely necessary, but good to have. Because I've used these packing box planters for the last 5 years in a row, we want to give the soil a nice little refresh. So I'm going to put some Redmond Mineral Light and a little kelp meal, just a nice sprinkling in there. Then I'm going to top the whole thing off with some nice, well-composted compost to top off the beds and to create a nice planting medium for all our new starts here. This is going to help with water retention. The kelp meal is just dried seaweed, which has all kinds of goodies that help strengthen a plant's immune system, which right when we're transplanting is when they're the most vulnerable. So this is a great time to do that. We'll do another quick sprinkle of that kelp meal and mineral light mix just on the surface of that compost too, just so we've got it. A very little bit with this stuff goes a long way, especially if our compost is good. The other thing I really like to do before I transplant is soak the roots of my plants with some kelp or seaweed emulsion and a little bit of vitamin B1. Again, these aren't necessary things, they're just things that give it a little bit of an extra head start when you're transplanting. The best thing I found to soak the little roots of my plants before transplanting is the lid of a packing box, which incidentally the bottom of those packing boxes are my garden beds right here for my kitchen garden, which actually leads me to my next tip. Plant your plants where you are most likely to use them the most often. Kind of the same permaculture principle I talk about all the time, putting things in the way, on the way, so that you remember to take care of them, so you can check on them often, and so you also remember to use them. Huge things. My kitchen is right here. So I want to plant my little kitchen herbs right by the kitchen where I need them. I always try to plant my plants in the early evening after the heat of the day has passed, and ideally before we've got a few days of cloudy, overcast weather, and even more ideally some rain coming. So it's late afternoon, we've got 5 days of rain ahead, and my plants have had a couple hours to soak in their little solution. You can see they're nice and moist as they're dripping out. Time to transplant. Two other really important considerations are giving plants enough space to grow to their full fruition as opposed to how little they are right now, and also sun access. Because this is my herb garden that's next to my kitchen, I am sacrificing a little bit of sunshine because we have a lot of trees growing around here. So knowing how the sun actually hits this box is how I've arranged the plants to plant them. And you'll notice I'm not trying to squish 50 plants into these little beds. I'm giving each one ample space to grow. And this layout will be great for this particular assortment of herbs and spices, I guess. So as we're taking our little plant out of here, we've soaked it, so it should come out pretty easily in one little fell swoop here. As long as it's not root bound, we don't really want to do anything to disturb the roots any more than they need to be, because we don't want to induce any more transplant shock to the plant. There we go. And we'll take our little label. We'll put it right where we can see it, but where it's not going to create any extra shade for the plant. And I will also say that in our climate especially, a lot of these herbs are actually what's considered perennial, which means they'll come back year after year. We've had some success with that happening with certain herbs and some lack of success. But if this was a full sun garden and there wasn't trees all around us, a lot of these herbs would get a lot bigger than they actually have in years past in this garden. So if this is your first time planting a garden, don't make the same mistake that so many beginners do and plant all of your plants so close together that then they end up competing all season long for nutrients, for sunlight, and for all the other good stuff that they need to grow as big and as vibrantly as possible. As we're planting any of these things, any leaves that are sick or diseased or anything else or just die off, you want to go ahead and pull those, because when there are sick or diseased leaves, the plant is going to send energy towards healing those leaves. And right now, all we want the plant to be sending energy to is establishing a new root system and getting well established in its new growing place. So we'll just pull all those damaged things off. Also, then if they have any funguses or anything else that they're bringing back from the nursery, we don't actually accidentally introduce it into our gardens at home as well. Squeezing the edge of that pot. This one is a little bit more root bound, so we're just going to really gently tease those roots apart. But again, because we've soaked it, that's really easy to do. What we don't want to do is just really violently rip the roots apart. And that's all we really need to do there. Marigolds don't have a super long growing season here in our climate, so for some early in the season pest protection and just little pops of color out here while these plants are still small, I'll put these little marigold plugs in, knowing full well that they're going to come out of here before this thyme and stuff actually needs a little bit more growing space. 3 different kinds of thyme, because thyme is delightful on steak, and we eat a whole lot of that around here. Basil plants have a really sensitive root system, so we don't want to break up their roots at all, but also because this is a plant that thrives when we cut it more often, we also want to reduce our issues with transplant shock by actually clipping it and giving the plant a little bit more of a head start as far as not having quite as much greenery that it has to support right after transplanting. So I'm coming in and pinching off the little heads right behind their growth nodes so that they will actually come again. And another real major pro tip for basil is, I said at the store, this is one that actually does a lot better from seeds. So if you need an early start on your basil growing crop like I do, make sure as you're planting it, you sprinkle a few basil seeds around the plant as you're planting it, so that then they have a chance to grow up as you're starting to use this plant already. After we've got our plants planted, we want to make sure that we water them in really well. We're actually expecting some rain, so I'm not even going to do very much here, but I'll just give them a little drink just in case. If this is your first year gardening, one really important thing to mention, especially since I told you I made these planting boxes out of packing boxes, is that your soil has good drainage. The last thing we want to do is care for our plants a little too much and drown them because we're giving them too much water. There are holes in the bottom of these boxes that let the excess water drain, which is a very important aspect of gardening. Just felt like it should be mentioned here. All right, we'll take our basil clippings and put them in a little glass of water in the fridge to wait for supper time. And we'll take our pepper and tomatoes and other vegetable starts down to the big garden to talk about how to transplant those. Okay, we've teleported down to the big garden to plant some of our other vegetable starts, and we'll start with these tomatoes. So I mentioned earlier in the video that it's okay to have a nice long leggy tomato start like this because we are going to bury it as deeply as possible, and all of these little root hairs here are going to turn into roots. And then this little bit of plant matter is actually all that's going to be exposed above the soil. This is going to give the plant a huge head start. It's also going to help our tomato to be self-watering, self-searching for nutrients and all of the other good things that we get out of lazy gardening methods like this. So we're gonna create a nice little hole here for it. If you've watched my past videos, you might actually also notice that we're planting, God forbid, our tomatoes in the same place we planted them last year, which is a huge gardening no-no for conventional techniques, but for us lazy gardeners, a huge yes, yes, because with healthy soil, crop rotation does not matter. In the bottom of that hole, just like we did above, we're going to grab a little tiny scoop of mineralite and kelp meal. We're gonna grab a nice healthy scoop of compost. We're gonna just keep working that down into the hole, deeper and deeper, until we get all the way to the bottom. And because I'm thinking about the eventual size of this tomato, I also want to make sure I place it in the middle of the bed so it's got plenty of room to grow, because it's eventually going to be about this big. All right, I think that'll do it. Put nice fresh compost, well composted compost, fresh from the compost pile, around it. And again, because I want to give this little tomato the best head start possible, I'm going to put a little marigold right by it. This is going to help with pest prevention. And then for extra pest protection, I'm going to take this basil plant and plant it right in front on the sun side. But because this basil plant is so leggy, I'm going to nip off the whole top part of the basil plant. I'm going to pull off all of this excess growth here. I'm going to take off those leaves, and leave only this. I'm gonna pop this in a nice glass of water, and this basil plant will self-propagate and turn into a new basil plant that I can plant around more tomato plants in a couple weeks. Just a cool little hack there. Similarly, we're gonna do the same with this basil plant. Nip it right there so that there's not too much plant matter for it to have to support, so that we can lessen the transplant shock. Take off all this extra foliage here, and then pop that in some water for a few days. Put this right by our tomato plant, and there we go. Marigolds, basil, tomatoes, all together in the same bed here. Pull some mulch up around them, and we'll come back once this starts growing and starts staking and supporting and trimming the tomato plant. That's for another video for another time. Pepper plants are also in the same family as tomatoes, so we're going to treat them very similarly. We're going to take off all the bottom foliage here, pinch off all those bottom leaves, and not have too much vegetation up above the soil line to support, to reduce our transplant shock, but also to give all of these little nodes here some chances to get more soil up around them and to establish bigger, healthier roots. We're gonna scooch the mulch back from the top of the soil there. We're gonna add some nice aged compost, a little sprinkle of kelp meal and mineralite, and then we're going to get it as deep down in there as we possibly can without disturbing the roots. We're gonna plant it down in there. We'll also add a little marigold companion for it, just for a little extra pest protection. And we'll put a little basil plant by it that's been pre-clipped on the sunny side here. And then we're going to immediately add some support. Tomato cages are absolutely crap for holding tomatoes because they hold the foliage of the plant too close together, and also, who are we kidding that any tomato plant is actually this small? But they're fantastic for trellising cucumbers and for protecting our little pepper plants here. So after we've gotten all that stuff kind of around it, we're gonna bring the mulch up around it so that we can get some extra moisture protection. I've still got a lot of work I need to do on these beds later on in the season because we're still pretty early on here, so don't mind the fact that I'm making a little volcano. Trust me, the rest of this will soon join it. But here we go. We've got that in, and then just like our plants up at our herb garden up there, we want to make sure that we water it nicely, nice and deep here. Get that soil really well saturated. Careful not to splash too much up on the plant itself. And again, I'm actually going a little light on my watering because we're expecting a very heavy downpour shortly. So I don't need to go wild on this. But speaking of water and the general health of all of our transplants, as the plant is getting reestablished and it's, recovering from transplant shock, it's okay to water it a little bit more. But as lazy gardeners, the best thing we can do for our plants is monitor that transition process really carefully. Make sure that we're not giving them too much water and drowning them with our well-intentioned love, but also making sure we let them struggle a little bit so that they're naturally inclined to send their roots deeper in search of the nutrients and the water that the plant needs, so that we can then go on about our lazy gardening summer dreams and not have to be here tending them, watering them multiple times a day, etc., etc., etc. Right after transplant time, if your plants are totally riding the struggle bus, here are 3 really quick tips to help you troubleshoot what might be going on. If your plant is super wilty and droopy right after planting, it is very likely transplant shock or that it's thirsty. We talked about soil drainage and making sure that they're well watered as they're getting first established, but if it's more than just a little droop and it's more like a shrivel, that is very likely extreme transplant shock and or a lack of water. In the first week or 2 after transplanting, if the leaves of your plants are starting to turn slightly yellow or have little spots on them, that is very likely a sign that your soil does not have enough nitrogen in it. And in that instance, I would highly recommend doing a quick soil test and figuring out where your soil's baseline is so that you can amend it and you don't have problems throughout the entire gardening season. If you plant your transplant and it stays tiny, it is very likely that you planted it too early. Wait till the soil temperatures rise up a little bit and try again. We are very obviously growing more than just a garden this year, so we will be putting the lazy gardening stuff we've been talking about for the last couple years to the true test, as we'll have to take a little time off this summer. Make sure you stick around. We will see you in the next video. Cheers! Ooh, a strawberry. Delicious.